Before my return to the northern wastes, Kylin's mistress caused another scene before me. With a face bare of cosmetics, her beautiful almond eyes shimmering with unshed tears, she blocked my carriage in the middle of the street. I know my station is low and I am unworthy of the general, but the child in my womb grows larger by the day. I cannot bear for my child to be branded as illegitimate from birth. I beg you, my lady, show mercy and allow me to enter the manor. With that, she knelt on the ground and kowtowed deeply. The people on the street gathered around, pointing and whispering about me. Everyone knew the matriarch of House Thorn was a jealous woman. In her 5 years of marriage to the general, she had never permitted him to take a concubine. It seemed this beautiful mistress's wish was destined to be denied. Along both sides of the street, the murmurs of the crowd rose and fell, a constant hum in the air. Only I inside the carriage remained impassive, my voice calm. Seraphina, in 3 days, Housethorn's bridal carriage will come to your door to welcome you. The noisy street fell instantly silent. The crowd was stunned. Seraphina was stunned. The street was utterly still. After a long moment, a woman with a cloth wrapped around her head and a basket of vegetables in her hand whispered to the person beside her, "What's gotten into Lady Thorne today, to allow this young woman into the manor so readily? Wasn't she the one who stabbed the general when he tried to take a concubine before?" "Yes, I heard the matter even reached the Golden Throne Hall. The Emperor himself had to intervene to settle it. Why would she agree today?" Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. A man scoffed with disdain. "What's there to guess? It is about time. It is perfectly normal for a husband to take a concubine. Who is she to stand in his way? Her agreeing now is just her knowing her place. If you ask me, these northerners are just small-minded, not as understanding and considerate as the women of our central plains." The crowd murmured in agreement. Insults have always been like the heavy snow on the eaves, capable of pressing down on a person until they can no longer breathe. Beside me, my maid, Lily, wore an indignant expression, but I remained impassive, my gaze fixed on the butterfly hairpin atop Seraphina's head. I had seen that hairpin before, at the gilded jade pavilion. Though simple, its craftsmanship was exquisite. The body was carved from golden, threaded jade, and its wings, fashioned from the finest white jade, were polished as thin as a cicada's wing, breathtakingly lifelike. When worn in the hair, the wings trembled with the wearer's movements, truly resembling a butterfly about to take flight. The proprietress had said it was the only one in the world. I adored it and wanted to buy it immediately. But the proprietress of the gilded jade pavilion had looked troubled. We were old acquaintances, and from her expression and her stammering, I knew the pin had already been reserved, and the one who had reserved it was my husband, Kylin. In our 5 years of marriage, the only gift he had ever given me was a wooden hairpin he had hastily carved for our engagement. And now this butterfly pin, worth 1,000 gold pieces, he had so casually given to Seraphina. He must truly adore her. A cold laugh echoed in my heart. My thoughts slowly drifted back from the memory. I lowered my gaze to Seraphina, who was still kneeling on the ground, a look of disbelief on her face. My tone was flat. "Mistress Seraphina, we will meet again in 3 days. Lily, let's go." Upon returning to the manor, I immediately gave orders to prepare for Seraphina's arrival. The entire household was shocked. After all, they had witnessed how fiercely I had argued with Kylin when he first wanted to take a concubine. My calm and collected demeanor now left everyone bewildered. News of this quickly reached Kylin's ears. Hearing it, he rushed back from the training grounds in the suburbs. He didn't even have time to remove his armor when he arrived at the manor. He strode quickly to my chambers, his cloak dusted with wind and snow, and threw open my doors. I was sitting at my desk writing. With his forceful entrance, the candlelight on the desk flickered, and the shadow of my figure on the wall trembled and broke apart. "Ilara, you refused to let Seraphina in before, and now you agree. What exactly are you planning?" "I am warning you. Seraphina is carrying my child. If anything happens to her, I will never forgive you." Kylin stood in the doorway, panting, his eyes glaring at me. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet his, the sharp-eyed general before me, with a sword at his waist, gradually overlapped with the image of the callow youth in my memory. In a daze, I felt as if I had returned to 5 years ago. I met Kylin in the border city of Azuramist. At that time, Azuramist city was still under the jurisdiction of the Central Plains. As a northerner and a princess of the 16 tribes, I was not supposed to enter freely, but I had always heard my people talk about the dazzling variety of food in the taverns of the Central Plains. So I slipped away from my brother and my father the Khan, disguised myself, and snuck into Azuramist city. After a grand meal at a tavern, I was seized by the collar by the owner because I had no local currency. He was about to drag me to the authorities. That was when Kylin appeared. A youth in a blue robe, tall and slender, with a sword at his waist. He was untamed, his eyes like cold stars. He held out a coin purse and said in a clear voice, "Innkeeper, I'll pay this young brother's bill." The innkeeper took the purse, released my collar, muttered, "Bad luck," and walked away. The youth before me watched me with a burning gaze and smiled. "My name is Kylin. What is yours?" The image of the bright, clear-eyed youth was imprinted on my heart for a long time. But now, in just 5 short years, things had changed. The Kylin before me still wore a sword at his waist. But it was no longer to protect me, but another woman. I looked at him coldly and sneered. "The last time we saw each other, husband, was 3 months ago at the Duchess of Jing's birthday banquet. On that day, you were happily conversing with your colleagues, exchanging toasts with other generals, but you never once glanced my way. Today, thanks to Mistress Seraphina, I am fortunate enough to have you look at me." Kylin snorted. "I didn't come back to discuss such useless matters. Seraphina has had a pitiful life. She is just an orphan. Why must you be so selfish as to never show her a shred of tolerance?" Hearing this, a stifled laugh escaped my chest. "An orphan, general. It seems you've forgotten. I am an orphan too." Kylin's expression faltered for a second, but he quickly regained his cold, hard demeanor. "But you've lived in splendor as the matriarch of House Thorn for years, and Seraphina, because of your selfishness, she has had to follow me without a proper title. Do you have any idea how much ridicule and grief she has endured? Because of my selfishness. Kylin, you were the one who told me I would be the only one in your life. You said it yourself." "Yes, I did. So what? If you were even half as gentle, understanding, and reasonable as Seraphina, we would not be in this position today. If I had known you were so cruel and vicious, I would never have met you. Ilara, I truly wish I had never known you." Kylin's face was ashen. He ground his teeth, uttered this final, cruel statement, and slammed the door as he left. The force was so great that the paper on my desk fluttered to the floor. From a love, at first sight, coupled to bitter enemies. I had asked myself countless times why things had turned out this way. Was it when he met the pitiful orphan? I numbly picked up the fallen paper. The words, "Writ of divorcement," leaped into view. 5 years ago, to be with Kylin, I willingly gave up my identity as a princess, and took the name Ilara. I bid farewell to my family and friends, and followed Kylin to the Central Plains. Kylin had never met my parents. I always told everyone I was an orphan. A young person's love is always passionate and foolish. For that little bit of love, I had disregarded everything. In these 5 years, the more I missed my family, the more I hated Kylin for his infidelity. Now, it was all finally coming to an end. I stared at the words and murmured, "Kylin, as you wish, I will grant you your freedom." The carriage stopped at the back door of the tavern. I lifted the curtain, put on my veiled hat, and walked inside. A servant was already waiting. He led me up to the 3rd floor, pushing open the door of the private room. I looked at the man sitting in the center. A sudden sting filled my nose, and I fought back tears as I called out, "Brother." My brother had sent me a letter a month ago. It contained only a single short sentence. "Ilara, do you have any regrets?" Seeing those words, my tears fell like rain. Even on the day I discovered Kylin's affair, I had not cried once. But seeing this letter, my heart let out an endless, sorrowful wail. Grievance, regret, and resentment crashed over me like a tidal wave, threatening to swallow me in the endless night. I wrote a letter back to my brother. Not long after, another letter arrived. In 1 month, I will come to the capital to meet the Emperor of Yan. At that time, I will take you home. A month passed in what felt like an instant. The brother before me was more mature and steady than when I had left home. He took my hand, his eyes turning red. After talking with my brother for a while, I realized there was another man sitting behind the curtain, dressed in a moon-white brocade robe. The man had a cool demeanor, his black hair held back only by a white jade clasp. Even through the curtain, I could tell he was handsome. "Brother? Who is this?" My brother paused for a moment before introducing him. "This is a friend of mine in the capital, Lord Palace." I stood and curtsied, but my mind was racing. Palace, if I remembered correctly, that was the surname of the imperial family. The man behind the curtain nodded slightly. Seeing that it was getting late, my brother told me to head back. The time for my departure to the northern wastes was set for the night of Kylin's wedding. 3 days later, in the following 2 days, 2 stories spread through the streets of the capital. One was that the notoriously fierce Lady Thorn had actually agreed to let the general take a concubine. The other was that the third princess of the northern wastes was departing from the capital to return home. Although no one knew who this third princess was, or why she was suddenly returning to the north from the capital, there was no shortage of speculation about her. Many even wrote stories about the princess having a secret romance with the emperor or one of the princes. I held a pair of shears, trimming the magnolia blossoms before me. Lily stood beside me, holding a storybook and wiping her tears. The love story between the third princess and the Prince of Jing is so moving. My lady, you must read this part. The Prince of Jing is poisoned, and on his deathbed, he holds the princess's hand and chokes out, "If there is a next life, I will still marry you and make you my wife." Lily let out a sob, tears streaming down her face. I held the shears, speechless. The Prince of Jing is 60 years old. How could those scholars even write something like that? Just as I finished speaking, footsteps sounded at the door. I looked up. It was Kylin. "I have important matters to attend to tomorrow, and I may be gone for several months. Seraphina will be in your care at the manor, my lady." Though his words asked me to care for her, Kylin's eyes were dark, a clear threat in their depths. I understood his unspoken message. If anything happened to Seraphina and her child, I would not have an easy time either. I gave a cold laugh, my face impassive, not even looking up. "Kylin, you are not important enough for me to bear the weight of a life." Kylin's face turned as black as coal. After a long moment, he nodded with a humorless smile. "That would be for the best." With that, he strode away. Watching his retreating back, my brow furrowed. Important business that would take several months. A bad feeling suddenly bloomed in my heart. The day of my departure arrived in a flash. Thorn Manor was decorated with lanterns and colorful banners, filled with a festive air. Even Kylin, dressed in his wedding robes, wore a rare smile. Only, the matriarch, had locked myself in my room. The servants tried to summon me several times, but I refused to go. A servant reported this to Kylin. With a look of annoyance and impatience, Kylin flicked his sleeve and said only to let me be. So the servants bothered me no more, and I, in my room, had just finished writing the last line of the writ of divorcement. I stood up, placed the wooden hairpin Kylin had given me together with the writ. I changed into a man's robes, slightly disguising myself, and climbed out the window. As I left the manor, I happened to cross paths with the wedding procession, the Suona horns blaring. I blended into the crowd and looked up for one last time at Kylin, mounted on his tall horse, his face wreathed in smiles. Then, without a shred of lingering feeling, I walked away. I changed into the traditional attire of the northern wastes. My brother helped me into the carriage for the journey home. A long procession of guards flanked the carriage. Just as I settled in, a familiar voice sounded from beside the carriage. Third princess. I am the captain of your escort, General Kylin. We will depart in a quarter of an hour. If the princess has any commands, please do not hesitate to call for me. My heart lurched. The general escorting me home. Was Kylin? The bad feeling from the day before had suddenly become a reality. Today was his wedding day. Why was he here? I sat silently in the carriage. Kylin looked up at the heavy curtain that separated us. A young soldier hurried up to him. We have searched the entire capital and cannot find the lady. We only found this in her chambers. I slightly lifted the curtain and peeked through the gap. The soldier was holding the writ of divorcement and the wooden hairpin I had left behind. Kylin took the writ, his brow furrowed in annoyance. A writ of divorcement? Ha, I thought she had truly accepted Serafina, but it seems she was just trying to play hard to get. She came to the Central Plains alone with me. Where else could she go? Leaving House Thorn. Stop searching. After a few days of hardship, she will come back on her own. The soldier hesitated, but finally clasped his fist and said, "Yes, sir." Playing hard to get. I couldn't help but let out a cold laugh. Even now, he still thought I was playing games, trying to win back his heart. I coldly dropped the curtain. The carriage swayed and began to move. I was going home. We had been on the road for over a month. During this time, I spoke little, except for a few words with my brother. I always wore my veiled hat whenever I left the carriage, so no one noticed that the elegant and noble third princess was the same woman they gossiped about as the notoriously fierce Lady Thorn of the capital. General, the carrier pigeon has returned. There is still no news of the lady from the capital. The soldier reported, steeling himself. Kylin's face was grim. He was silent for a long time before saying in a hoarse voice, "Keep searching, report back." "Yes, sir." The soldier took his leave. Kylin sat motionless on his horse. But his hands, clenched tightly on the reins, were white, knuckled from the force. Over this past month, I had watched Kylin's impatience slowly curdle into anxiety. I felt nothing. The only thing that made me nervous was the ever-shrinking distance to my home. Another month passed on the road. We finally reached the territory of the northern wastes. From afar, I could see my father the Khan and my mother standing on the city walls. I bit my lip hard, taking a long moment to compose myself before stepping out of the carriage. According to the agreement between our two nations, Kylin could only escort me to the city walls. As I walked through the city gate, I passed him. The wind gently lifted my veil, revealing my chin. At that exact moment, Kylin looked up. His expression froze. He instinctively moved towards me but was blocked by the city guards. His pupils dilated, and he stared blankly as I walked further and further away, until I disappeared from sight. He still did not know that Alara was my name in the Central Plains. My full name was Alara of the Kylin tribe. The moonlight spilled across the desert, a vast expanse of white, like a field of silver sand. I braced myself against the city wall as I slowly walked back to the palace. This year marked the 3rd year since my return to the northern wastes. My thoughts drifted, and I remembered a conversation I had overheard that evening between the ministers and my father. The ministers were worried. These past 2 years, the Central Plains' power has surged. The young emperor's ambitions are likely growing. With our current strength, I fear we are not strong enough to stand against him. My father sat in the center, and at these words his white brows furrowed slightly. What does the young emperor want? The ministers exchanged glances, then lowered their heads, too afraid to speak. Only the forthright jailer spoke up. "Your Majesty the Khan, the emperor of the Central Plains has sent word. He desires a marriage alliance." Ridiculous. All the princesses of our tribes are already married. How can there be an alliance? Hearing my father's question, Jiller paused, then continued. The one the young emperor desires is indeed still in the palace. It is the 3rd princess. The vast hall fell silent. Does the young emperor not know that Alara has been married before? He knows. It was with the help of the Central Plains emperor that the princess was able to return to the northern wastes smoothly. My father pondered. That young emperor is said to be sickly and short-lived, with a cruel and unpredictable temper. If Alara were to marry him, her future. Giller saw my father's reluctance and hesitation. He knelt on the ground and declared loudly, "For the sake of the 16 tribes, the emperor of the Central Plains will surely not mistreat the princess. For the survival of the 16 tribes, I implore your majesty to reconsider." The ministers all knelt and echoed his plea. My thoughts slowly returned to the present. I leaned against the wall and looked up at the bright, clear moon hanging in the sky. I had never seen such a cold, clear moon in the Central Plains. It was as beautiful as the South Sea pearl Kylin had given Seraphina. I was so reluctant to leave the northern wastes again. I sighed. Thoughts rose, fell, and crystallized in my mind. After what felt like an eternity, I straightened my stiff body. I looked up at the bright, cold moon one last time and walked into my father's study. My mother, fearing I would suffer in the young emperor's harem, stayed up for 3 days and nights preparing a long list of dowry items and several personally trained maids skilled in martial arts. She stroked my face. Her eyes nearly cried blind. She knew this might be the last time we would ever see each other. The welcoming procession from the Yan dynasty had already arrived outside the city walls. I don't know if Kylin and I were fated to be star-crossed. The general who came to welcome me today was him again. He looked much thinner than he had 3 years ago. "Third princess, please ascend the carriage." Kylin extended his hand. His gaze was like a hawk's, fixed on my every move. I glanced at him coolly, ignoring his outstretched hand. Leaning on my maid's arm, I entered the carriage without a second glance. The atmosphere was solemn. With the sound of a horn, the carriage began to move with a creak. We traveled all the way to the capital. Upon arriving, I was temporarily housed in a royal villa. I quietly observed my lodgings. They were beautifully and comfortably furnished, with a touch of exotic flair. Clearly, a lot of thought had been put into it. Kylin followed me silently. From the corner of my eye, I could frequently feel his gaze on me. His task of escorting me to the villa was complete. But for some reason, he hadn't left. My maid stepped forward. "General Thorne, it is getting late. The princess wishes to rest. You may leave." Kylin acted as if he hadn't heard, his dark eyes still locked on me. After a few seconds, he suddenly lifted his robes and knelt on one knee. The day the princess returned to the northern wastes was the same day my wife Alara disappeared. "Upon welcoming you this time, I've noticed many similarities between you and my wife. Forgive my disrespect, but would the third princess be willing to remove her veil?" The air fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. My maid's expression turned to anger. "How dare you, General Thorne? There has always been a distinction between men and women. How can an unrelated man like you be allowed to gaze upon our princess's sacred face?" Kylin remained kneeling, unmoving. "I am only asking the princess to remove her veil. The customs of my dynasty are open-minded. This is not an offense. I have served as the princess's escort twice, yet I have never heard her speak. Even when she speaks to her maids, her voice is as faint as a mosquito's buzz." "Princess, what are you afraid of?" I sat in the seat of honor, calmly meeting his probing gaze. Suddenly, a commotion came from outside the door. An official hurried in, a smile on his face. "Third princess, His Majesty heard of your arrival in the capital today, and has come to the villa to see you. Please prepare yourself to welcome His Majesty." "Oh, General Thorne, what are you still doing here?" Kylin's expression darkened, and he stood up. He gave me one last deep look, bowed his head in a salute, and strode away. I watched his retreating back quietly. The official, without delay, summoned the court ladies to change my clothes. I chose an immortal's gown embroidered with a pattern of 100 butterflies flitting through flowers. A maid styled my hair into a loose bun. I looked at myself in the bronze mirror. I looked indescribably beautiful and elegant. My mind wandered. The Emperor of Yan. I had seen him once before. That time after a fight with Kylin where I had stabbed him. Kylin was so angry he wanted to divorce me. the matter had escalated to the Golden Throne Hall. From beginning to end, I had knelt with my head bowed. I had never seen the emperor's face clearly, but I remembered his voice was very pleasant. The young emperor was 5 years my junior. I had heard that because he had been sickly since childhood, his personality was cruel and violent, a ruthless killer who was very difficult to get along with. After entering the palace, I had better stay as far away from him as possible. As I was picturing a thin, gloomy, damp emperor in my mind, a eunuch's sharp cry came from outside. His Majesty has arrived. My maid quickly helped me to the door. I curtsied. Lowering my head, I saw a man in a white brocade robe slowly approach and stop before me. He lifted his cool, slender hand to help me up, his voice like rustling snow. "Third princess, there is no need for such formalities." I let him help me to my feet and looked up. The man had a high nose and thin lips, with very thin eyelids and incredibly thick, dark lashes. His features were too handsome to describe. In the cold, bleak wind, though his face was a little pale, he was nothing like the vicious, sinister figure I had imagined. I found myself staring, dumbfounded, noticing my gaze. The man's lips curved into a smile. The smile dazzled me for a moment, and I quickly lowered my head and looked away. So the Emperor of Yan, Lysander, was this handsome? I felt like I had seen him somewhere before. Lysander took my hand and led me into the room. I specifically consulted with Prince Tarek before having the craftsman design this room. "Is the princess comfortable?" "You consulted my brother?" Lysander nodded. I finally remembered where I had seen him. In the tavern 3 years ago when I met with my brother, he was the man behind the curtain. At the time, I only thought the surname Palace was odd and assumed he was some prince. I never imagined he was the emperor. I frowned slightly, feeling that something was not right. I answered in a low voice. "The room is wonderful. Thank you, Your Majesty." Lysander moved lightly, his gaze falling on the calligraphy I had left on the desk. It was just some practice I had done in my spare time. It wasn't very good. According to Kylin's past critiques, my writing was like a dog scratching, unbearable to look at. But Lysander looked at it very seriously. My face grew hot, and I quickly went to the desk to put the paper away. "It was just some idle practice. It is not well written. I fear it may offend Your Majesty's eyes." Lysander's dry, warm hand clasped my wrist, and he laughed softly. "Though the writing is casual, the ink is even, the script is fluid, and the style is soft and elegant, with its own unique character. In fact, I find it to be exceptionally well written." My fingertips tightened unconsciously. No one had ever praised me like that before. During my 5 years in the Central Plains, everyone had mocked me for being unversed in poetry and music, for my crude and unrefined ways. At every banquet, I was always the one being ridiculed. Later, Kylin, tired of being embarrassed, simply stopped taking me. And yet Lysander said my calligraphy was good. He didn't seem as cruel as the rumors suggested. I stared at Lysander, stunned. His hand holding my wrist, he subtly, almost teasingly, slid it up to the back of my hand. He picked up the brush from the rack, placed it in my hand and stood behind me, appearing to encircle me. But in reality he was very proper, only his robes brushing against mine. Although I was no stranger to intimacy, this situation still made my heart pound like a drum. Lysander seemed not to notice my stiffness. His voice was husky. "If you write like this, princess, your calligraphy will be even more beautiful." Our overlapping hands moved the brush across the paper. It wasn't until dusk, when a eunuch reminded him from outside the door, that he left. "Your Majesty, it is getting late. It is time to return to the palace." Lysander gave a few more instructions and then returned to the palace. That night, I dreamed of Lysander. In the dream, the window was half open, the budding branches of early spring casting shadows on the eaves as sunlight streamed in. White paper was scattered across the desk. Lysander's robes were half undone, loosely falling to his abdomen, revealing his fair, lean muscles. He was half lying on the desk. I held a brush, and his sharp, bony hand clasped my wrist, pulling me closer to him. The tip of the brush accidentally dripped ink onto his firm, fair chest. I panicked, trying to pull away, but he was so strong, I couldn't move an inch. The hairs on my body stood on end as I watched him get closer and closer, his eyes hazy and dangerous. He leaned close to my ear, his voice searing, and said, word by word, "If you were to write here, princess, your calligraphy would be even more beautiful." The dream ended abruptly. I woke with a start, sitting up in bed, panting, my heart wailing in despair. I had actually had a wet dream about a man I had only met a few times, who was 5 years younger than me. There were still a few days until the wedding. I spent these days in the villa, not stepping out. I heard from the maids that Kylin had requested an audience several times, but was always turned away. Last night, Kylin had even knelt outside my door the entire night, just begging to see me. He only left because his concubine, Seraphina, had complained of heart pain. Hearing the words, heart pain, I scoffed. Seraphina was an expert at having heart pain. Back when I was still at Thorn Manor, whenever Kylin and I were in the same room, she would conveniently have an attack of heart pain. Even Lily could see she was faking it, but Kylin believed her every time and willingly fell for it. Thinking of this, my thoughts turned to Lysander's harem. I heard that Lysander's harem was not large, and the position of empress had always been vacant. In the years since he ascended the throne, he had only held one selection for concubines. In his first year, and the ones he kept were all unfavored daughters from lesser branches of noble families. I wondered if they would be easy to get along with. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The wedding day arrived quickly, perhaps to give face to the 16 tribes of the northern wastes. My wedding to Lysander was of the highest imperial standard, even more lavish than that of an empress. There was an endless stream of rare treasures, silks, and brocades. A general amnesty was declared, and the entire nation celebrated for 3 days. In the palace of heavenly purity, I sat on the bed in my wedding gown, feeling anxious. Even though this was my second marriage, for some reason I was still incredibly nervous. One moment I was thinking about what to say. The next I was thinking that since Lysander had been sickly since childhood, he probably wasn't very strong physically, and perhaps I should spare his pride in bed. Before I could come to any conclusion, Lysander entered the palace. He was slightly tipsy, and because his skin was already fair, the flush on his cheeks made him look even more handsome. He squinted, his eyes hazy with drink as he looked at me. Perhaps from drinking too much, he was swaying as he walked and was about to fall. I quickly got up to support him. "Your Majesty!" Lysander took the opportunity to wrap his arm around my waist. I couldn't support his weight and let out a cry, falling backward uncontrollably. We both tumbled onto the bed. Lysander was on top of me, his head nestled in the crook of my neck, nuzzling me like a kitten. A tingling sensation shot down my spine. My voice trembled as I called out again. "Your Majesty." Lysander's voice was husky with drink, sounding both obedient and soft. "Don't be afraid, princess. I won't do anything." Hearing this, I was taken aback. Wasn't this our wedding night? There was no need to be so polite. It is okay to do something. After all, Lysander wasn't bad. Looking, I hesitated, about to speak, when Lysander continued. "There is no place for me in your heart yet. Is there, princess?" His words were strange. Without context, I was completely bewildered. "I know you haven't let go of Kylin yet, but I am willing to wait. I have waited for so many years." Lysander slowly lifted his dark eyes, the corners of which were now tinged with red. It was a look that inspired a surprising tenderness. "All I want is your heart, princess." Lysander moved closer, his head still resting in the crook of my neck, murmuring to himself. But my attention was caught by his words, "so many years." The feeling of strangeness grew stronger. "What do you mean, you have waited for so many years?" Lysander's eyes slowly closed, and he didn't answer my question. "Your Majesty, don't fall asleep yet. What so many years?" Lysander's breathing grew deeper. He was clearly asleep. I sighed. The questions in my heart lingered for a long time. When I woke up the next morning, Lysander was gone. I asked a palace maid, "Where is His Majesty?" "Your Highness," General Thorne reported early this morning that he had urgent matters to discuss, so His Majesty has gone to attend to his duties. Kylin, 5 years ago he had cast me aside like a worn-out shoe, finding me inferior to Seraphina in every way. I had granted him his wish, letting him be with Seraphina and disappearing completely from his life. And now he was pestering me again and again. What on earth was he trying to do? The more I thought about it, the more agitated I became. Disregarding the eunuch's attempts to stop me, I lifted my skirts and hurried to the imperial study. Just as I reached the door, I heard voices from inside. "We hear that you waited outside the princess's villa for several days. Kylin, you are bold. I know my actions were improper, and I am willing to accept any punishment. But Your Majesty, I have only one question. Is the princess my missing wife, Alara? When the princess returned to the northern wastes 3 years ago, did Your Majesty assist her?" I quietly circled to the back window and peered inside through a crack. Lysander was leaning back in his chair, relaxed. His expression was cool and indifferent, not at all flustered by Kylin's questioning. His pale, slender fingers tapped rhythmically on the arm of the dragon throne. It created a strange sense of tension. Kylin, kneeling on the floor, clenched his jaw, staring straight at Lysander, his posture one of defiance, determined not to leave without an answer. After what felt like an eternity, Lysander finally spoke, his tone unhurried. "She is my royal consort, Alara of the Kylin tribe. Kylin, you have overstepped." Hearing this, Kylin became even more agitated. He opened his mouth to ask another question, but was cut off by Lysander. "The Prince of Yu has been restless in the southern provinces lately. We appoint General Fan as the commander, and you as his deputy. Lead 20,000 troops and march south. You will depart in 1 month. You may leave." Lysander tossed a memorial scroll in front of Kylin. Kylin and Lysander had known each other for years. He knew this was a sign of the Emperor's wrath. The words on the tip of his tongue had to be swallowed back down. Kylin stiffened his neck, picked up the scroll, and held it above his head. "Your servant obeys." For the next half a month, Lysander spent almost every night in my chambers. We talked about poetry, literature, and stories, but we never slept together. I had thought that with Lysander spending every night with me, it would surely cause a stir in the harem. But to my surprise, there was not a single ripple of disturbance. Even when I met the other concubines, they always greeted me with smiles. It was very strange. Today the harem, along with the female relatives of the court officials, held a flower viewing banquet. The banquet was half over when concubine Jing from the Palace of Everlasting Joy and I arrived late. Before we even reached the banquet, we heard the voices of several ladies talking in a nearby pavilion. "Seraphina, it has been 3 years. Is there still no news of your former lady of the house?" "Yes. The general has been searching for her for 3 years. I don't know where she could have gone. It is all my fault. If I hadn't entered the manor, she wouldn't have run away from home." Hearing the familiar tone, my steps faltered. I turned my head to look at the pavilion. Inside, several ladies dressed in magnificent expensive gowns were chatting. I immediately recognized Seraphina, whom I hadn't seen in 3 years. Dressed in a simple spring gown, her face looked as fresh and beautiful as a lotus emerging from the water. Seraphina lowered her head, wiping away tears, seemingly filled with guilt over my disappearance. The other ladies, hoping to curry favor with the general, offered words of comfort. "It has nothing to do with you. Alara was always fierce and jealous, a woman who couldn't tolerate anyone else. You and the general are in love. It wasn't her place to interfere." "Exactly. Alara is a northerner after all, and an orphan without parents. The general was more than benevolent to let her be the matriarch for so many years. I heard Alara ran off with another man. Seraphina, you mustn't take it to heart." Seraphina dried her tears and forced a smile. "When the lady was in the manor, she often made things difficult for me, but I never held it against her. I am only afraid that with her gone, the general will be heartbroken. The ladies offered another round of comfort. In a corner where no one could see, Serafina's lips curled into a faint smile. I took a light step and walked towards the pavilion. The eunuch behind me immediately announced loudly, "Her Highness, the royal consort, has arrived." The women in the pavilion were stunned. They quickly moved to the center of the pavilion and knelt in a kowtow. "We pay our respects to the royal consort." I walked to a stone stool, and my maid quickly spread a blanket over it. I rested my hand, adorned with golden nail guards, on the table, lifted my chin slightly, and looked at the trembling women and Serafina kneeling on the ground. My voice was languid as I asked, as if casually, "What were you just saying about northerners?" Hearing this, the kneeling women felt their scalps tingle with fear. Who in the entire country didn't know that the highly favored royal consort was the very worthless northerner they had just been discussing? The women kept their heads bowed, not even daring to look at me, kowtowing like they were pounding garlic. "Your Highness, please quell your anger. We did not mean that. Your Highness, please understand. It was Serafina who was talking about the missing matriarch of House Thornalera. We absolutely did not mean to offend your Highness." Hearing this, I lifted my gaze to Serafina, kneeling in the corner. She was huddled on the ground, her head bowed low, as if she didn't dare to breathe. "In that case, Serafina, you tell me." At the sound of her name, Serafina trembled. Her voice shook as she replied, "Your Highness, we were just talking about an uncouth orphan. I fear it would dirty your Highness's ears." Hearing the word, orphan, I couldn't help but scoff. If I remembered correctly, Serafina herself was an orphan. She must have gotten used to a life of comfort and wealth to be looking down on others. I idly tapped my golden nail guards. "If I recall correctly, you are also an orphan." No matter how uncouth Alara was, she was the lawfully wedded matriarch of House Thorn. Is it the place of a concubine who rose from the rank of a serving girl to pass judgment on her? Serafina's face instantly turned ugly. The ladies of the capital's official families knew exactly how Serafina had seduced their master. The main wives, in particular, detested such underhanded methods. But when they saw Serafina, they still had to greet her with a smile. All because the general doted on her. Now that I had exposed her so ruthlessly, a flash of malice crossed Serafina's eyes. Beside me, concubine Jing rolled her eyes at Serafina and hugged my arm, pouting, "Sister, why bother getting angry with a plaything? If we don't go to the banquet soon, it'll be over. I heard there are fresh lychees from the southern provinces this time, and I've never tried them. Let's go quickly." I smiled and tapped concubine Jing on the forehead. I stood up, looked down at the still kneeling women, and said in a lazy tone, "You may all rise." The women finally stood, looking up at me with trepidation. The moment Serafina saw my face, her expression turned to one of utter shock. She let out an uncontrollable cry. "Ilara!" I gave a faint smile. Everyone present looked confused. Very few people in the capital had ever seen my face. Kylin found me crude and rarely took me to banquets, so only a handful of people recognized me. Serafina's pupils dilated, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Impossible! Impossible! That orphan without parents, how could she be the third princess of the Northern Wastes?" Serafina stared blankly, her beautiful face twisting in distortion. She kept muttering, "Impossible." I gave a soft laugh, my tone turning a degree colder. "Serafina has shown disrespect to her superior, has no regard for social hierarchy, and has offended a royal personage. She is sentenced to kneel for 6 hours and be confined for 3 months. A court matron stepped forward, acknowledged the order, and forced Serafina to the ground. She knelt there, her eyes wide and staring straight at me. I took a maid's arm and, without another glance at her, turned and left with concubine Jing. After the palace banquet, Lysander came to my chambers. I was sitting before the bronze mirror combing my hair. "I hear you sentenced Serafina to confinement today." Once upon a time, Kylin had asked me the same question. That day, Serafina had deliberately hidden the wooden hairpin Kylin had given me. The evidence was clear, but she denied it. crying pitifully that I was wrongly accusing her, which led to an argument. As the matriarch, I had the right to discipline a maid. I had her punished with 5 strokes of the cane. That evening, Kylin stormed in, furious. Serafina is delicate. Not like you, a northerner raised on horseback. It was just a wooden hairpin, yet you were so cruel. Alara, I will make you pay for the suffering Serafina endured today. After that, Kylin confined me for 3 months, leaving me with the fear of enclosed, dark spaces. Now Lysander was asking me the same question. Did he also want to hold me accountable? I put down the jade comb and turned to face Lysander. Yes, and Lysander walked up behind me. He picked up a strand of my soft, cool black hair that fell over my shoulder and took the jade comb from the table. I felt the princess's punishment was not severe enough, so I took the liberty of fining Kylin half a year's salary as punishment for his failure to properly manage his household. I looked surprised, gazing at our reflections in the bronze mirror. Behind me, Lysander combed my hair, his strokes gentle, as if afraid to hurt me. After doing that, I still felt it was not enough. My attendant, Chang, mentioned that the gilded jade pavilion in the city has a new butterfly style hairpin. I remembered the princess is fond of butterfly-themed accessories, so I had Chang purchase it immediately. With that, Lysander produced a butterfly hairpin as if by magic and placed it in my hair. It was made entirely of sky, blue jade from a snowy mountain, its style and craftsmanship infinitely more exquisite than the butterfly hairpin that had once been a source of such pain for me. Lysander looked at my reflection in the mirror with satisfaction, then leaned in closer. His voice was low, husky. Princess, is your anger appeased? A cool, fresh scent accompanied his movement. Me breath hitched, my face flushed, and my heart was in such turmoil I didn't know what to do. Your Majesty has already given me more than enough. It is not enough. I want to bring all the best things in the world before you, Princess, for you to choose from. I turned my head to look at Lysander. His dark eyes shimmered with a soft, bright light. You must be tired of being cooped up in the palace. In a few days, I plan to hold a royal hunt in the suburbs. Would the princess be interested? In the northern wastes, my riding and archery skills were even better than my brother's hunt. Of course, I was interested. I nodded eagerly. Lysander laughed softly, looking at his handsome, affectionate face. My heart skipped a beat. I pressed my lips together, turned my head away, and refused to look at him any longer. This hunt was unprecedented in its scale. There were no restrictions on rank. Basically, anyone of importance in the capital was there. I had always loved a lively scene, and today I was overjoyed. Lysander stayed with me for a while before being called away by his ministers. I took a few guards and chased a wild deer into the forest. The deer was very cunning. I got carried away in the chase, and when I looked up again, the guards were gone. I tightened my grip on my bow and was about to look for a way out when I heard the clop of horses' hooves from behind the trees. Thinking it was Lysander coming to find me, I called out, "I am over here." The hoofbeats grew closer, but the rider was not Lysander. "It really is you, Alara." Kylin sat on his horse, his eyes filled with a complex, sorrowful look I couldn't comprehend. Kylin and I were silent, our gazes meeting in the air. In the forest, there was only the rustle of the wind blowing through the leaves. The ground was still damp from last night's rain. I was the first to break the silence. "General Thorne, shouldn't you be on your way to the southern provinces? Why are you here?" "I am here, of course, to wait for my wife." Kylin's expression was grim. I no longer wanted him to know of my existence, to have nothing more to do with him, but he had pestered me repeatedly. There was no point in pretending anymore. It was better to lay everything out in the open. "Kylin, I made it very clear in the writ of divorcement. You and I have nothing more to do with each other. I never agreed to it. You've been lying to me since the beginning, hiding your identity and claiming to be an orphan. Then you left without a word. I've been searching for you for 3 years. When we met again, I discovered my wife had become the Emperor's consort. Alara, what do you take me for? You have no right to question me, Kylin. You were the one who was unfaithful first. Kylin's expression darkened. That night, I was drunk and mistook Serafina for you. When I sobered up the next day, I knew I had wronged you. I wanted to give her some money and send her away, but you wouldn't let it go. Later, Serafina became pregnant by accident. I couldn't let my own child be abandoned, so I thought I would give her the status of a concubine and let her have the baby first. But you never tolerated her, and you became more and more vicious. In my moments of despair, it was always Serafina who was by my side. Plus, she was pregnant, so my heart naturally favored her. But I never once thought of divorcing you. You are my wife. Ilara, you were barren for 5 years. You don't know how much I wanted a child. I cut him off coldly. We once had a child, Kylin. Kylin looked shocked, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. What did you say? I looked at him coldly, saying each word distinctly. The child was 2 months along. I went to your study to tell you I was pregnant, but I walked in on you and Serafina together. When I returned to the manor, I ended the pregnancy. Kylin's eyes turned crimson. He stared at me, his gaze terrifying. You got rid of our child! I tightened my grip on my bow and the reins, backing away step by step. Kylin, you don't deserve to have a child with me. Do you hate me that much? Ilara, do you hate me that much? Kylin advanced on me, his emotions rising. I glanced to the side, assessing the terrain, my grip on the bow tightening. Kylin's horse stepped on a pile of fallen leaves. Crack without hesitation. I released the arrow. It shot towards Kylin with a whoosh. Kylin instinctively swerved, but the arrow still struck his shoulder. I immediately pulled on the reins and galloped away. Kylin clutched his wound, his eyes blazing, and chased after me. He drew his bow and shot my horse's leg. The horse let out a long neigh. I felt my body lose its balance and fall forward uncontrollably. 2 overlapping cries of Ilara echoed through the silent forest. The expected pain never came. A figure in bright yellow flashed before me and caught me in an embrace. He held me as we rolled several times before stopping. The scent of the man, cool and fresh, filled my nose, still shaken. I looked up. Lysander was holding me, his eyes closed, and the blood flowing from beneath him stained the earth. Your Majesty! Your Highness, General Thorn has been apprehended. The captain of the Imperial Guard reported to me with a clasped fist. I nodded, my gaze turning to the Imperial physician who was examining Lysander by the bedside. How is he? The physician withdrew his hand from Lysander's pulse and knelt. Your Highness, His Majesty's right arm is broken and will require a period of rest. Otherwise, there are no serious injuries. After taking his medicine, he should wake up shortly. I let out a long sigh of relief. As long as he was okay, the physician and the others withdrew, leaving only a few of the other consorts and me in the room. Consort D looked at Lysander on the bed, her expression troubled. His Majesty's right arm is broken. For the next while, he will need someone to attend to him. Hearing the words, attend to him, the expressions of the other consorts turned sour. Seeing their reaction, I was puzzled. Whenever my father was ill, his concubines would have fought for the chance to stay by his side day and night. Why were Lysander's concubines so reluctant, even faintly fearful? I glanced at the palest of them. Attendant Zhuang. He cleared my throat and said deliberately, in that case, sisters, let's take turns. We'll start with Attendant Zhuang today. The moment I finished speaking, Attendant Zhuang's legs gave way, and she collapsed to the floor. Her beautiful eyes were filled with terror, her voice trembling uncontrollably. Your Highness, have mercy. This servant has been feeling unwell lately. I fear I may pass my illness to His Majesty. I beg your Highness to choose another sister. Then Concubine Jing. Concubine Jing immediately knelt, her small face tear-streaked. Sister, I'll do anything you ask. Just don't make me stay in the same room as His Majesty. I crossed my arms and narrowed my eyes, looking at the kneeling consorts. Why are you all so afraid? You must explain yourselves to me today." Over the next 2 hours, I slowly came to know a side of Lysander I had never seen before. And I finally understood why the world called him cruel and violent. Consort D had known him since they were children. According to her, Lysander was sickly, the most unfavored and taciturn of all the princes. To have successfully ascended the throne, playing the game of power and stirring up the world, he could not be a soft-hearted or gentle person. The day he seized the palace, he had cut off the former crown prince's head in the main hall without so much as blinking. My father has served 3 dynasties, and he has never seen such a ruthless emperor. That was his own brother. Consort De said softly, still shaken by the memory. Blood stained the golden throne hall. The stench of it lingered for a month. A minister publicly accused him of fratricide and seizing the throne, calling him too brutal and immoral to be emperor. His Majesty sat on the dragon throne, laughed, and said nothing. Everyone thought the matter was over. But the next day, the minister's head was hanging from the city walls. I frowned as I listened to Consort Des. This was not the gentle Lysander I knew. Concubine Jing added. And when I first entered the palace, I happened to see His Majesty punishing a eunuch. He cut out the eunuch's tongue. I heard from my maid that it was because the eunuch was gossiping about General Thorne and his wife. Just a bit of gossip, and he had his tongue cut out. Because of that, I still have nightmares about it. Concubine Jing grabbed my hand, her expression earnest. Sister, you don't know how happy we all were when you came to the palace. I have never seen His Majesty so gentle. To be honest with you, in all the years we've been in the palace, none of us have ever spent the night with him. I was stunned, thinking I had misheard. You've never spent the night with him? They all nodded. Consort Dead seemed to remember something and gasped. Well, if you must say, I suppose I spent the night with him once. But that night, he made me weave straw hats all night. My hands were so sore I couldn't stop. I don't know what kind of strange obsession that is, Concubine Jing continued. Now that you mention it, I remember too. When I first entered the palace, His Majesty summoned me once and made me eat pastries from the northern wastes all night. I like them, but I hate dry food, and he wouldn't even give me a sip of water. Concubine Jing looked aggrieved, and Consorta seemed thoughtful. I guess he has some childhood trauma from when the late emperor sent him to Azuramus City. The way I was weaving that straw hat was definitely the style of the northern wastes. His Majesty has been to Azuramus City? Yes, the late emperor disliked him and sent him to Azuramus City to fend for himself. His Majesty stayed there for many years. I thought carefully. 3 years ago, he helped me return to the northern wastes. His words on our wedding night that he had waited for me for many years. And now, the northern wastes and Azuramus City. That strange feeling grew stronger. It felt like something was about to surface. As night fell, the other consorts couldn't be of much help, so I sent them back and stayed to take care of Lysander myself. Lysander was still unconscious. The flickering candlelight cast his already cool features in an even sharper light. I lifted my fingertips and brushed them against his temple. What have you been hiding from me? I resolved to ask him everything when he woke up. As the night wore on, I sat by the bed, fighting off sleep, but my eyelids grew heavier and heavier, and before I knew it, I had fallen asleep. When I woke up, I was in bed, and Lysander was gone. I threw on a robe and went out to look for him. I hadn't gone far when I heard a familiar voice from a tent outside. I lifted the flap to look inside. Inside, Kylin was pinned to a torture rack, rusty chains piercing his shoulder blades. In the dim light, his blood-stained lashes cast a dark shadow. Lysander sat before him. The tension between them was palpable. 3 years ago, when Alara wanted to return to the northern wastes, you knew that with my skills I would surely be able to track her. So you and her brother put on a show, letting her escape right under my nose and return to the north, didn't you? Kylin bit out each word, the rage in his voice unmistakable. Yes, Lysander's tone was flat, his lowered eyes betraying no emotion. Even as Kylin before him was so furious, his eyes were bloodshot, looking as if he wanted to devour him whole. Hearing the confirmation, the fire in Kylin's eyes almost turned his dark irises red. He struggled against the chains that bound him, roaring, "Lysander, she is my wife! How dare you!" The sturdy iron chains held him fast. Every movement was excruciating. Soon, Kylin's strength gave out. Lysander let out a low laugh, looking coldly at Kylin, who was panting like a dying dog. "I might as well tell you. Seraphina was also a gift from me to you." Standing outside the tent, my breath caught in my throat. My mind went blank. Seraphina, how could it be? Inside the tent, Kylin's head shot up, his dark eyes wide with shock. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Lysander tilted his head, watching Kylin's devastated, pathetic state with interest. In the deep night, Lysander's white robes seemed to glow like a pearl, as pure as the moonlight. He looked the picture of elegance, but the words he spoke sent a chill down the spine. Seraphina was a courtesan raised by a wealthy merchant. Later, she was cast out by the merchant's wife for stealing. I had Chang arrange a chance encounter for you two. I knew she would want to attach herself to a famous general like you. At first, I only intended to use her to drive a wedge between you and the princess. I didn't expect you to be so cooperative. You gave me a rather unexpected and pleasant surprise." Kylin's eyes were bloodshot, and he looked as if his soul had been sucked out of him. He kept repeating the word, "Why?" "Kylin, I have been in love with the princess for just as long as you have." The image of a slender, sharp-featured boy gradually overlapped with the Lysander before me. Could he be him? The first time I met the boy, Kylin had brought him to meet me at a tavern. Kylin had only said he was his cousin. The boy was quiet, and I was active. I often took them through the streets and alleys, having a great time. I taught them how to weave straw hats and treated them to the best, most authentic pastries. I had even taught him archery. He was a prince of the Yan dynasty. He was Lysander. Kylin's pained voice pulled me from my memories. But Alara was already married to me. "So what?" Lysander sneered. "You were the one who couldn't resist temptation, the one who was unfaithful. You deserve to be punished." Lysander. I slowly walked back to my room. The amount of information I had just heard was overwhelming. For a moment, I was at a loss, my heart in turmoil. Lysander's cunning and obsession far exceeded my imagination. He was a truly patient hunter, setting his trap years in advance. If the pawn, Seraphina, had failed, would he have used other means? The answer was undoubtedly yes. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Lysander was terrifying and dangerous. But this obsessive, crazed man, in this foreign land, strangely made me feel an unprecedented sense of security. I tossed and turned all night. The next morning, a eunuch came to report, "Your Highness, a madwoman accosted this servant early this morning. She claims to be Seraphina and says she has something to report to you. Does your Highness wish to see her?" Seraphina, wasn't she under confinement? She must have heard that Kylin had been imprisoned and had escaped. I was curious to hear what she had to say to me. I nodded slightly. The eunuch led Seraphina into the room. I looked at her and almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was disheveled. Her robes were gray and dusty. It seemed she had suffered a great deal on her journey from the capital to the hunting grounds. "Speak. What do you want?" Seraphina fell to her knees with a thud. Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her face. "If your Highness is willing to help the general, this servant is willing to return him to you and leave the capital with my child. I beg your Highness, for the sake of your past feelings for the general, please save his life." I looked at Seraphina, kowtowing before me, and felt a sense of absurd amusement. 3 years ago, she had blocked my carriage, knelt, and kowtowed, begging me to let her into the manor. No, she was kowtowing, willingly offering to leave the capital. "Seraphina, I have already divorced him. Whether Kylin lives or dies has nothing to do with me. Your Highness, you and the general shared many years of affection. Can you truly be so heartless as to abandon him?" As long as your highness is willing to save the general's life, this servant promises to never appear before you again." Serafina crawled to my feet, her words sincere. It seemed she would do anything, even be my slave, if I would only save Kylin. I idly adjusted the hairpin at my temple and sneered. "And after I save him, you would probably go back on your word, wouldn't you? Are you truly willing to leave Kylin? To give up the wealth and splendor of the capital?" Serafina froze. Seeing through her little scheme, I laughed coldly. "Besides, what makes you think I would want Kylin back? A soiled man like him, you can keep him for yourself." Serafina's head shot up. Seeing that I wouldn't be swayed by her soft approach, and that I was showing her no respect, her eyes turned malicious. "Is your highness truly unwilling to help?" I couldn't be bothered with her any longer and summoned a maid. "If I recall correctly, you are still under confinement. Are you not? Chun, escort Serafina back to the manor and have her closely guarded." "Yes, your highness." Chun and two matrons stepped forward to seize Serafina. Serafina's face was filled with panic. She knew that if she were taken back to the manor, she would never get out again. And Kylin would be in even more danger. If something happened to Kylin, what would become of her and her child? Serafina's heart hardened, and her face turned fierce. She pulled the hairpin from her hair, leaped up, and took me hostage. She shouted, "I'd like to see who dares to touch me." Serafina's hairpin was pressed against my neck. The servants in the room were pale with fear. Alerted by the commotion, Lysander and his imperial guards rushed in. Serafina's hand holding the pin was trembling, and her body was drenched in a cold sweat. She was clearly terrified, but she had no way out now. "Your Majesty, as long as you release the general and let our family be reunited in peace, I will release Alara." Lysander's eyes flickered, his gaze moving to my neck. Serafina was so nervous and afraid that her hand was shaking violently. The tip of the pin had already broken my skin, and a thin line of blood was seeping out. Lysander's fingers twitched, and a murderous intent flashed in his eyes. "Bring Kylin here." The Imperial Guard took the order and left. A moment later, they brought in Kylin, covered in blood and filth, his original features unrecognizable. Serafina's eyes widened, her face contorted in a grimace. Her grip on the pin tightened, her knuckles turning white. She cried out pitifully, "General!" Unexpectedly, she did have some genuine feelings for Kylin. Kylin, however, acted as if he didn't see her, saying nothing. I had seen enough of this drama and was starting to feel bored. I glanced to the side to observe Serafina. She was still staring at Kylin, not noticing my subtle movements. Though my martial arts skills were not refined, I was more than capable of handling a weak woman like Serafina. I suddenly struck out, knocking the hairpin from my neck and seizing Serafina's arm. I clutched my neck and slapped her across the face, causing trouble time and time again. She really thought I had no temper. She cried out in pain and fell to her knees, not yet realizing what had just happened. The Imperial Guards surrounded her and seized her. Lysander ran to me, grabbed my shoulders, and his deep eyes scanned me from head to toe, as if checking me for any injury. "I am fine, Your Majesty. It is just a scratch." Lysander's eyes grew darker with murderous intent, the corners tinged with an unnatural red. He commanded sharply, "Take Serafina and Kylin to the dungeons, immediately. There must be no delay." The guards took their leave. I knew that the most excruciating tortures awaited them. When most of the people had left the room, Lysander suddenly turned and pulled me into his arms. I was stunned for a moment, then hugged him back. He buried his face in the crook of my neck. I don't know if it was my imagination, but he seemed to be trembling. "Your Majesty, thank God you are safe. It is all my fault for not protecting you." "It has nothing to do with you, Your Majesty." Lysander's embrace tightened, as if I would fly away if he let go. His hug was like a thick, irresistible woolen blanket, bringing warmth and a strong sense of suffocation at the same time. I sensed his unease, and a strange feeling of satisfaction bloomed in my heart. I patted his tense back. "I am here, Your Majesty." Lysander slowly released me, his long lashes damp. He was already fair-skinned, and the redness in his eyes now gave him a broken, fragile beauty, rather than making him look pathetic. I found myself staring. On tiptoe, I slowly leaned in and kissed the corner of Lysander's lips. Lysander's dark eyes widened instantly. He subconsciously tightened his hold on my waist, but I pulled back after a light touch. "Your Majesty, everyone is waiting for us to return to the palace." Lysander nodded numbly. Seeing his dazed expression, I laughed softly and slipped from his embrace. The night Kylin attempted suicide, Lysander and I were lying on reclining chairs, reading. Lysander was, of course, reading about the arts of kingship. I was reading a storybook I had bought from outside the palace. The story was at a particularly passionate part between a wild scholar and a noble lady. My face was flushed as I read, and I couldn't help but steal a glance at Lysander. I had been in the palace for half a year, and we still hadn't slept together. Every time we got to the crucial point, Lysander would exercise restraint and get up. I didn't know what the problem was. Could it be that because he was so sickly as a child he had some lingering health issues that he was too embarrassed to tell me about? As I was lost in my wild thoughts, Chang knocked on the door. "What is it? Speak." "Your Majesty, news from the dungeons. General Thorne attempted suicide today but was saved by the jailers." Hearing this, Lysander and I exchanged a look. "Suicide," I murmured, frowning. Hearing my voice, Lysander's face darkened almost imperceptibly. "The jailers found that the object General Thorne used to attempt suicide was a wooden hairpin." My eyes shot up, my mind racing. I didn't notice Lysander's face growing darker and darker behind me. "Your Majesty, do you think?" "Throw the hairpin away. The members of House Thorne will be exiled in 3 days. From now on, there is no need to report on Kylin's matters." "Yes, Your Majesty." Hearing Lysander's stuffy tone, I finally noticed his sour expression. "What is wrong, Your Majesty?" Lysander covered his face with his book, his voice muffled and unhappy. "When have I not cared about you? The moment you hear about Kylin, you become so anxious." "I am not anxious. I was just wondering why he would suddenly commit suicide." Lysander suddenly sat up and hugged me, cutting off my explanation. "All this time, I've been restraining myself every day, afraid that being too passionate would frighten the princess. But I can't bear it any longer. What must I do to make you have eyes only for me?" I looked at the man holding me so tightly, so anxious he had even forgotten to use the royal we. Suddenly, on a whim, as if inspired, I asked, "So every time you don't go all the way, it is because you are afraid of scaring me?" The moment the words were out, Lysander's body stiffened, and his ears turned crimson. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hearing my laughter, Lysander turned his head away in annoyance, refusing to look at me. I turned his head back to face me and said, seriously, word by word, "I like your obsession. I like your jealousy. I like that you can't live without me. Lysander, it is you that I like." Lysander's long lashes trembled, and his gloomy eyes began to sparkle with a soft, bright light. I leaned in and pressed a kiss to his lips, holding him tightly. Outside the window, rain fell on the banana leaves. The trees were shrouded in mist, and a sliver of moonlight spilled onto the floor. I vaguely remembered Azuramist City. Years ago, a slender, handsome young boy stood in the moonlight. He blinked his eyes and asked me carefully, "When I grow up, will you marry me, please?"